And now it's time to get reacquainted with an old friend, the minor pentatonic scale. So I'm sure you've played this scale before. Heck, you've heard it a lot. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the same approach that we did with the modes and get reintroduced to it. Because just like those modes, you know, the minor pentatonic scale is a very valid, very musical scale, and there's a whole lot of musical potential held within, but we have to boil it down to its basic parts and take a look at those, you know, and just examine them, right? So what we're gonna do, same deal, we're gonna take the key of E, let's say E minor, right? Because we're doing E minor pentatonic. So we can have that low E so that we can drone it and reference it with every note in the scale. And we're gonna play the pentatonic scale. So it's gonna start on the 7th fret of the A string, then 10th fret, 7th fret on the D string, 9th fret, and then 7th fret on G. 5 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, penta 5, right? Already establishing the musical context there, right? Just by having that low E string there. So the pentatonic scale is just 5 notes. So when you learn like the whole like 6-string pattern, right? So if we're still in E minor up here, we're actually playing 2 octaves of it. We're going, there's the first one, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the next 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we have 2 additional notes that just keep going. Right? So it's just kind of how the fretboard is laid out with the way that the strings are tuned and everything, right? So that's essentially the 2-octave scale. So the pentatonic scale, like at its bare bones form, is just those 5 notes. So let's get to know those notes. Let's kind of wander through the scale. So we have 5 notes instead of 7, right? Like with the diatonic scale. So we have less notes to work with. But I've heard it said before that a pentatonic scale is just a diatonic scale with the uninteresting notes taken out. Which, it's funny, but I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's still funny. But it's kind of true in the sense that the minor pentatonic scale is so popular, right? There's no way you just don't hear it in music, especially in Western music. It is just all over the place, right? Not just for guitar, but for just like musical ideas in general, like singers use it. I mean, it's just prolific, right? So let's get acquainted with this scale one note at a time. We got our root note. All right, we have our minor third. This is what makes it minor pentatonic, right? It all is in that third. It's our minor third. We have our 4th, our 5th, and then our flat 7th, minor 7. So how each note sounds in relation to the root note. We can kind of get an idea of the tension that it's given us, right? Of course, the root note has been the same throughout this whole little series of exploring these scales, right? Same with for at least most of them, for the 4ths and the 5ths. Those intervals are relatively the same, with the exception of a couple of them, where, you'd have like a flatted 5th or a raised 4th or whatever. So with that in mind, we pretty much have that minor third and that minor 7 are kind of the more standout notes, right? So those are kind of some fun notes to like get to know a little bit more. And again, we don't want to fall into the trap, or at least repeat the old bad habit of just ascending and descending the scale mechanically. We want to get to know the notes. So if we were to do something like starting on the minor third, for example, that's pretty cool. That's cool, like all within the minor pentatonic scale. And I started off by just playing some, kind of wandering through and letting that kind of, give me a starting point so that, as far as like when I hear it, my ear can be like, oh, I kind of want it to go, right? Remember, you don't have to be a good singer to use that trick, right? It's cool. Now, it's got an interesting sound. We're not really trying to blues it up too much, right? Because, that's commonly what's associated with minor pentatonic is this bluesy stuff. And don't get me wrong, I love blues and blues guitar as much as the next guy, assuming the next guy loves blues guitar a lot. But that being said, it's like we want to be able to utilize the scale in a way that doesn't always pigeonhole it into a bluesy kind of context. So you can actually use it in ways that, kind of like what I just played, seemed a little less bluesy and more just, I don't know, like it kind of had a little bit of a Old West vibe to it. Just something kind of, yeah, just kind of had a little bit of that old like spaghetti western kind of vibe to it that I think is pretty cool. So that's another thing that's awesome about exploring and getting to know scales in this kind of way, because it can jog or like paint pictures in your mind, which all of that stuff is really, really important, because like that's kind of how you harness inspiration. You don't want to just wait around for, you know, lightning to strike and you're just like, okay, now I have ideas. You know, you want to be able to have more of an on-demand control of them. And sometimes it takes just a little bit of encouragement. And that's why wandering through the scales is nice, you know? And I mean, you can create riffs like that, you know, like... you know, just, I don't know, I'm just kind of like klutzing my way through it, but just like, even just right there, I was just sort of like, there were a couple ideas I kind of liked. And when you do something like that, you want to just like stop for a second and take mental inventory of those things. Because so often we just sort of, you know, we'll just play guitar and then there'll be some ideas that we like as we go, but we won't stop and like refine them or like archive them. And then they just like drift away. And then we had like a potential cool idea that we can use, even if it's just like a lick we can pull out, you know, for improvising or something. And that was something that I struggled with for years, where like I would look back on like old recordings of stuff and be like, man, like every time I would make a recording of myself, there'd be little things in there that I really liked. And I'd be very glad that I made that recording, because it was long gone as far as memory is concerned, right? But I knew that I was just once in a blue moon would I actually record myself. And I felt this melancholy of like, man, I know there are like a million times where I could have just sat there and just hit record and then just played some random stuff. And there was stuff that I liked in the moment and then just completely forgot about. And I feel like I have to just start from scratch. But I digress. You know, if we're taking the minor pentatonic scale in this kind of approach, once we adapt it to back to the positioning that we're familiar with, right? Let's say going back to here. You can have that same like newfound knowledge and understanding of the scale that you can navigate it a little bit differently. So you're no longer just climbing up and down the scale. You can do something like, you know, so you navigate through it just with a little bit more intention than you know, that automatic mechanical ascending and descending kind of thing. You are going through it with anticipation on what sound you're going to get. Rather, you know, you're not just like shooting in the dark and be like, okay, let's see how this sounds. I mean, that, you know, in the beginning you want to do that because that's when you're getting familiar with the notes. But once you are familiar with them, you can anticipate how they're going to sound. So that way, when you make that next move, you know, you can actually plan it out in your mind. Like I've mentioned before, it's like you're singing the idea in your head, and then, you know, before you play it, and then when you play it, you manifest it on the fretboard. Then that idea really comes to life, and that I feel like should be just always on as far as your brain is concerned. Just like whenever you're playing, you always want to have that, like you're a step ahead mentally, where you come up with an idea, and then you just play it, and that's when you take the time to like spend with each of these individual scales, modes, pentatonic scales, whatever it is. This all applies to all of them. You get to know them note for note, so that way when you craft melodies, you'll actually be able to have more of a compositional mind, and you know, as far as like just being able to come up with something, and then you'll actually be able to play it. And then the more comfortable you get with that, you're going to be able to do it on the fly. So you can get to the point where when you're improvising, you are right there in real time, composing ideas and then playing them out on the fretboard simultaneously. But you can consider that, just like one of the end goals. Obviously that's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of new habits to build, but imagine being in that position musically. I mean, it's just a great goal to have. And it's something I'm always striving for. I'm always going to be striving for it, and so, but it's one of those things that I really wish I was told years and years and years ago that that's a goal worth having. Because that was more or less a goal that I stumbled upon myself after years of making mistakes, essentially. So once again, I invite you to wander through this scale, let that low E drone out, get to know each of those notes, see how you feel, and try and come up with something that you actually like.